Manhattan, New York. 11:43 p.m. Saturday, September 12th, 1959. The rain hammered the sidewalks of West 48th Street like bullets on concrete. Inside the Meridian Club, the air was thick with Cuban cigar smoke and the metallic scent of fear disguised as confidence. This was not a gambling house for working men. This was where federal judges laundered bribes through poker chips, where police commissioners turned evidence money into roulette stakes, where the untouchables of New York society came to prove their power by watching lesser men bleed. The mahogany doors bore no signs, no advertisements. The only identification was the man at the entrance, Tommy Marconi, 230 pounds of Brooklyn muscle wrapped in an expensive suit that couldn't hide the .45 under his left armpit. His job was simple: keep the wrong people out, keep the right people comfortable, and never ask questions about the briefcases full of cash that disappeared into the vault every morning at dawn. At 11:44 p.m., those doors opened. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson stepped inside wearing a charcoal suit tailored with surgical precision. No jewelry, no flash. His power wasn't measured in gold chains or diamond rings. It was measured in the silence that followed him wherever he walked. Behind him, two men in dark overcoats, Junebug Williams and Illinois Gordon. They moved like shadows, positioning themselves near the bar and the back exit without a word. At the center of the main floor, under a crystal chandelier that cost more than most Harlem families made in a year, sat the man who owned this temple to white supremacy and organized greed. Anthony Big Tony Scalise, capo in the Genovese family, third-generation Italian-American who believed his bloodline made him royalty in a city built on immigrant sweat. He wore his arrogance like cologne, too heavy, too obvious, choking everyone around him. Gold pinky ring, silk tie, manicured nails that had never touched honest work. He saw Bumpy approaching and didn't stand up, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge that a man of Bumpy's reputation had just entered his establishment. Instead, he laughed. The sound cut through the jazz music like a blade. Conversation stopped. Dice froze mid-roll. Every eye in the room turned to watch what would happen when disrespect met consequences in a place where both could be fatal. Well, Scalia said loud enough for everyone to hear. Look what crawled up from the sewer. He snapped his fingers. Two security guards stepped forward, hands moving toward their weapons. The insult wasn't just personal, it was public, calculated, designed to humiliate Bumpy in front of the most powerful criminals in New York. This is a private club, Scalia continued, his voice dripping with contempt. We don't serve animals here. We don't take jungle money. And we sure as hell don't let monkeys sit at our tables. The word hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Monkeys, said in front of federal judges, said in front of police captains, said in front of men who would carry this story back to their offices, their precincts, their courtrooms. The humiliation was designed to be permanent, public, and absolute. Bumpy didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice, didn't reach for the .38 under his jacket. He simply adjusted his tie with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation and looked at Scalise with the kind of stare that made grown men remember their mortality. "Mr. Scalise," he said, his voice calm as a judge pronouncing sentence, "you just made the last mistake of your very short career." He turned and walked out. No threats, no promises. Just footsteps on marble that sounded like a countdown timer starting its final sequence. Behind him, Scalise laughed again, telling his audience how he just put that uppity boy back in his place. The laughter echoed off the crystal and gold, filling the room with the sound of men who had no idea they'd just witnessed their own funeral. 72 hours and 14 minutes later, the Meridian Club would be silent forever. The vault would be empty. The crystal chandelier would be dark. And Anthony Scalise would be on his knees in that same spot, both hands shattered, a blood-soaked note pinned to his $1,000 suit jacket that read, "Animals don't leave witnesses." The story of how Anthony Scalise lost everything is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now, let's go back to September 12, 1959. The Meridian Club occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse on West 48th Street, accessible only through an unmarked steel door that opened into a marble elevator. Between 1955 and 1959, it functioned as Manhattan's crown jewel of illegal gambling, an instrument of control built with surgical precision. The operation's genius lay in its racial architecture. Numbers running from Harlem flowed upward into the club's coffers. Policy bets from Brooklyn were processed through its back office, generating over $70,000 weekly. Black money entered through street-level collectors working tenements and barbershops, but black bodies were forbidden from entering the club itself. The wealth extracted from Harlem's working poor was converted into chips that only white hands could touch, at tables where only white faces could sit. The same men who starved black neighborhoods of investment risked fortunes under crystal chandeliers, every chip representing rent unpaid uptown and evictions signed downtown. Anthony Scalise inherited this empire as third-generation organized crime royalty, a man who viewed cruelty as birthright and respect as tribute owed simply for existing. His grandfather had built the foundation on bootlegging profits during Prohibition. His father had expanded it through labor racketeering after the war. Scalise modernized the family business, swapping alleyway beatings for tailored suits and country club memberships. But the operating principle never changed. Remind every man beneath him exactly where he belonged through systematic humiliation. He had broken union organizers who questioned his authority, bankrupted businessmen who refused tribute, orchestrated beatings in broad daylight to demonstrate that consequences were for other people, never for him. Black businessmen unlucky enough to cross his operations found their stores smashed, credit ruined, names blacklisted. The club's protection network made such brutality untouchable. Judge Harold Whitman of the Southern District played poker every Thursday, his rulings on organized crime cases mysteriously favorable to Genevieve's interests. Police Commissioner's Deputy Arnold Fisk collected weekly envelopes in the private office, ensuring raids happened everywhere except West 48th Street. 3 federal agents from the Organized Crime Task Force treated the club as their personal sanctuary, their presence providing immunity better than any legal defense. The system was self-reinforcing. The more powerful participants, the more untouchable the operation became. Vincent Gigante had extended the invitation personally during an August sit-down at a Bronx social club. The message was diplomatic protocol. Bumpy Johnson controlled Harlem. The Genovese family controlled Manhattan, and mutual respect meant recognizing each other's territories. Gigante had specifically mentioned the Meridian Club as neutral ground where business could be discussed between equals. When Scalise intercepted that invitation and converted it into public racial humiliation, he wasn't acting on impulse. He was making a calculated statement to the 5 families that their agreements meant nothing compared to his authority. If Gigante wanted to treat Harlem operators as equals, Scalise would demonstrate that such respect was his to grant or deny, regardless of what arrangements the bosses had made. Within 6 hours of walking out, Bumpy's intelligence network had delivered complete operational breakdown. Illinois Gordon bribed a disgruntled dealer who provided security rotations, 4 guards on the floor, 2 at entrance, 1 in vault, shifts changing at midnight and 6 morning. Junebug Williams traced cash flow through a bookkeeper's mistress. Peak nights reaching 120,000. Vault capacity estimated at 250,000. A numbers runner who cleaned federal offices provided names of every corrupt official on Scalise's payroll, complete with payment amounts and collection schedules. At 3:47 morning, Bumpy identified Scalise's 3 fatal weaknesses with surgical precision: ego that demanded public dominance, greed that blinded him to risk, and delusional belief that connections made him immortal. He picked up the telephone and dialed Chicago from memory. 9 words. "I need the best card mechanic east of the Mississippi. Someone who can make luck look like skill." The line went dead. In a South Side pool hall, Silky Robinson smiled and began packing his tools. Harrison Whitmore III represented 3 generations of Connecticut shipping fortune, Yale education, and country club privilege that opened doors throughout Manhattan's elite circles. His tailored suits bore Savile Row labels, his handshake carried the confidence of inherited wealth, and his name appeared on museum donor walls across New England. What those credentials concealed was a debt that bound him to Ellsworth Johnson since August 1957, when amateur kidnappers had snatched his 16-year-old son from a Greenwich driveway. Local police hesitated, federal agents stalled, and Whitmore faced the helplessness that money couldn't solve. Bumpy had located the boy in 18 hours, returned him unharmed, and delivered the kidnappers bound and breathing in Whitmore's own Bentley trunk. When Whitmore offered payment, Bumpy declined, saying only that debts were remembered and eventually collected. Monday night, September 14th, 9:15 precisely, that collection notice arrived. Whitmore stepped from a black Chrysler carrying a leather briefcase containing $75,000 in sequential hundreds, more cash than the Meridian Club processed in a typical week. The doormen recognized breeding and wealth, waving him through without the screening reserved for unknown faces. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast light over mahogany tables, where policy money from Harlem was converted into chips only white hands could touch. Anthony Scalise noticed the briefcase immediately, his predator instincts activated by portable wealth of that magnitude. Initial caution about an unfamiliar player dissolved when Whitmore opened the case at the cashier's cage, revealing stacks of legitimate currency that passed every authentication test. 75,000 was 75,000, and money that clean carried no questions about its source or the man spending it. The performance began with calculated incompetence. Whitmore approached blackjack and systematically violated basic strategy, hitting on 17, standing on 12, doubling down on hands that made experienced gamblers wince. 10,000 evaporated in 40 minutes. He moved to craps, betting against probability on proposition bets, carrying house edges exceeding 15%. 8,000 disappeared before midnight. At roulette, he scattered chips across the layout with no system, chasing losses by doubling bets after each spin. The bleeding was deliberate, controlled, designed to establish him as what gambling operations call a whale, wealthy amateur whose ego exceeds skill, who views losses as temporary setbacks rather than mathematical inevitabilities. While Whitmore performed his sacrificial role, Bumpy's infiltration proceeded with invisible precision. Illinois Gordon had joined the dealer rotation Saturday, using forged Atlantic City references, his interview conducted by a floor manager who never verified credentials. He started Monday, dealing blackjack 3 tables from Whitmore's performance. Junebug Williams established himself as a regular businessman at the bar, ordering expensive scotch while making small talk about shipping contracts. 3 operatives joined the cleaning crew through a staffing agency that supplied low-wage labor the club never scrutinized. By Wednesday night, Whitmore had surrendered $40,000, cementing his status as the club's most profitable customer. Scalise personally greeted him, offered complimentary champagne, and suggested the private high-stakes room where serious players competed. The real operation happened in shadows. Illinois Gordon mapped vault security during shift changes, noting the single guard stepped away for cigarette breaks every 90 minutes. Junebug cataloged corrupt officials visiting back rooms, recording arrival and departure patterns. The cleaning crew photographed documents carelessly left on desks, identifying which games employed mechanical advantage. Wednesday at 11:43, Whitmore made his request. He wanted a private high-stakes game Friday night, winner-take-all format, opportunity to recover everything he'd lost, plus interest. Scalise agreed before Whitmore finished speaking, calculating how to extract the remaining $35,000 plus whatever additional funds this fool could wire from Connecticut banks. He had no concept that when Whitmore mentioned recovering everything lost, he wasn't referring to $40,000 in gambling losses. He was talking about Harlem's dignity. Friday night, 10 o'clock precisely, the Meridian Club operated at maximum capacity for what Anthony Scalise promised would be the slaughter of the Connecticut lamb. He had assembled his most valuable assets as witnesses: Judge Harold Whitman wearing civilian clothes, Deputy Commissioner Arnold Fisk with his plainclothes driver, 2 federal agents from the Organized Crime Task Force, and 3 capos whose approval validated his authority. The private room was arranged with surgical precision: polished mahogany table, green felt surface, 4 leather chairs, and $75,000 in high-denomination chips, creating a monument to anticipated victory. The game was 5-card stud, no limit, winner takes all. Harrison Whitmore III sat across from Scalise, perspiration visible despite controlled temperature, hands trembling slightly as he arranged his chips. The first 90 minutes proceeded according to Scalise's expectations. Whitmore won small pots, lost larger ones, his stack fluctuating but steadily declining. By 11:25, another $12,000 had disappeared. Whitmore's breathing growing labored, his collar loosened, face pale with what appeared to be mounting stress. At 11:30 precisely, Whitmore clutched his chest and froze. Color drained from his face with theatrical perfection, left hand gripping the table edge while his right pressed against his sternum. He gasped about medication, his doctor, his heart condition. The performance was flawless, genuine panic mixed with embarrassment, physical symptoms of cardiac distress manifesting in controlled sequence. A doctor rushed in from the bar, placed there by careful planning, checked Whitmore's pulse, declared stress-induced cardiac episode requiring immediate medical attention. Between labored breaths, Whitmore insisted his financial position could not simply evaporate. Club rules, framed near the entrance and drafted by Scalise's own attorneys, stated clearly that any designated proxy could complete a game in progress, and current pot could not be forfeited without unanimous consent from all players. Whitmore named his proxy, a financial advisor waiting in the lobby. Scalise hesitated exactly 4 seconds, calculating rapidly. Walking away meant surrendering $75,000 on principle, something his ego could not process. His greed had constructed a cage using his own regulations as bars. He signaled reluctant acceptance, confident that any replacement would be equally incompetent. The door opened. Ellsworth Johnson entered wearing a charcoal suit with surgical tailoring, moving with terrifying calm of an executioner arriving for scheduled work. Silence slammed into the room like physical force. Recognition spread through the audience in visible waves. This was the man Scalise had called an animal, a monkey, in front of judges and police commissioners. Conversations collapsed. Judge Whitman suddenly remembered early morning obligations. Federal agents discovered urgent business requiring immediate attention. Within 3 minutes, half the audience manufactured excuses to evacuate, survival instincts overriding loyalty to Scalise's entertainment. Bumpy crossed to Whitmore's chair, adjusted it with precision, and sat down. He straightened his tie with the care of a surgeon preparing instruments, placed one hand gently on the felt, acknowledging the chips, the rules, the witnesses. The legal framework was airtight. The proxy rule had been created by Scalise himself to prevent wealthy cowards from walking away from large pots. Scalise's face transformed through confusion, recognition, rage. He started to stand, to object, to summon security. Then the trap's mechanism became visible. The pot contained $87,000 of his own money. Ejecting Bumpy meant violating rules he used to legitimize his operation. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said, voice carrying judicial authority, "let's play cards." The dealer shuffled with practiced movements. Scalise caught his eye, delivering a signal refined through years of coordinated cheating. Fix the deck, ensure house advantage. What he couldn't know was that this dealer had arrived Tuesday with impeccable Atlantic City references. His real name was Silky Robinson, and every card in the house bore marks invisible to everyone except the man now sitting across from Scalise. Revenge at the Meridian Club arrived as mathematics, not spectacle. Bumpy treated each hand like surgery, removing malignant confidence one precise incision at a time. He didn't chase dramatic victories that would trigger suspicion. Instead, he won consistently, methodically, building advantage through probability disguised as skill. The first hour produced modest gains, 4,000 here, 7,000 there, always enough to register, but never enough to alarm. Silky Robinson's marked cards transformed every deal into information, and Bumpy folded when probability dipped below advantage, raised only when convergence of cards and numbers became overwhelming. By midnight, arithmetic told its brutal story. Bumpy sat behind $60,000 in profit, while Scalise's stack had shrunk accordingly. The house reserves, built on Harlem's policy money and Brooklyn's numbers running, now belonged to the man they had tried to humiliate. Scalise's collar clung closer to his neck, perspiration forming dark rings despite the room's controlled temperature. The psychological breakdown proceeded in stages. First came confusion as Scalise studied Bumpy's face for tells, finding only judicial calm. He watched the dealer's hands for mistakes, seeing only professional competence from his own employee. Then rage erupted. He accused Bumpy of marking cards, switching decks, signaling Confederates. The irony suffocated the room. Scalise was right about cheating, but wrong about the method. He couldn't prove anything, because the dealer ostensibly answered to him. By 1:15 morning, Bumpy's profit had doubled to $120,000. Scalise's betting pattern shifted from controlled exploitation to frantic pursuit. He doubled blinds, raised into obvious strength, chased losses with increasingly desperate stakes. Each hand stripped another layer from his confidence and another chunk from the club's protection fund. Around the table, power transferred in real time. Judge Whitman stopped making eye contact with his former benefactor. Deputy Commissioner Fisk moved his chair away from the action, survival instincts overriding purchased loyalty. They recognized the scent of authority changing hands, watching Bumpy stack chips with mechanical precision while offering no celebration, no gloating, just business. At 2 o'clock morning, desperation consumed logic. Scalise ordered the vault opened, bringing out the club's entire operating reserves plus something more valuable, briefcases containing dirty money from corrupt officials, protection payments not yet laundered, evidence of systematic corruption packaged in leather and combination locks. $230,000 in cash, joined deeds, titles, and promissory notes on the mahogany surface. Bumpy regarded the mountain with clinical detachment. For the first time, he addressed Scalise directly about terms beyond cards. Fold now, keep your hands, and we call this education. The words carried no threat, only finality. It was genuine mercy, an exit that preserved life, if not dignity. Scalise's ego made surrender impossible. He had built his reputation on public dominance, systematic humiliation of challengers. The offer of mercy insulted him more than financial loss. He pushed everything forward, betting his entire existence on cards he believed were mathematically untouchable. The final hand developed with agonizing precision. Scalise revealed his cards triumphantly. Full house, kings over tens, a monster hand that crushes 97% of all possible combinations. He reached for the mountain of currency in briefcases, smile spreading across his face like infection. Then, Bumpy turned over 4 aces. The silence became so complete that Scalise's labored breathing sounded like machinery failing in the crystal-lit room. The collection began with surgical precision. Bumpy approached the aftermath not as a gambler celebrating victory, but as an auditor executing foreclosure proceedings. He moved with deliberate calm, surveying assets that now belonged to him through mathematical correction. Illinois Gordon stepped forward with practiced efficiency, beginning the systematic inventory of conquered wealth. From the vault came $230,000 in sequential bills, policy money extracted from Harlem tenements and Brooklyn storefronts, finally returning to its rightful steward through cards and consequence. The briefcases of dirty money followed, their contents more valuable than currency. $150,000 in protection payments, judicial bribes, and purchase silence sat exposed under crystal light. Each stack carried a name. Judge Whitman's monthly envelope containing $12,000 for case fixing. Deputy Commissioner Fisk's quarterly payment of $18,000 for selective enforcement. Federal agents' retainers totaling $23,000 for investigative blindness. What had been insurance against prosecution was now evidence of systematic corruption, transferred from their control to his discretion. The legal documents came next. Scalise had wagered more than money when desperation consumed judgment. The club's liquor license, property deed, and insurance policies had been pledged as collateral. Bumpy examined each signature and notarization with judicial thoroughness, understanding that legal ownership of Manhattan's gambling crown jewel was transferring through mathematics rather than violence. He produced a fountain pen and placement documents prepared days earlier by Harlem attorneys who understood how power moved in shadows. The signing ceremony was designed for maximum degradation. Scalise was required to execute ownership transfers while his former associates watched, their presence converting private defeat into public execution. Each signature acknowledged that his empire had been dismantled by superior strategy, that 3 generations of organized crime royalty meant nothing against systematic planning. His hands trembled as he signed away his birthright, ink flowing like blood from self-inflicted wounds. Personal humiliation arrived through symbolic seizure. Bumpy gestured toward Scalise's gold pinky ring, the family heirloom representing organized crime authority across 3 generations. Scalise's fingers shook as he twisted it free, the metal catching light one final time before joining the pile of conquered assets. His Rolex followed, then diamond cufflinks, each removal stripping another layer of constructed power until he stood diminished in expensive fabric that no longer meant anything. For the corrupt officials, the message arrived without words. Their retirement funds now belonged to someone who could deploy them as evidence or leverage. Judge Whitman faced simple mathematics: disappear into early retirement, or explain to federal investigators how $12,000 in unreported cash vanished during gambling losses. Deputy Commissioner Fisk confronted identical calculations. They had 2 options: silent compliance or public destruction. Survival instincts made the choice obvious, and they retreated into shadows where their purchased immunity had always lived. The physical lesson required permanent reminder. Bumpy nodded to Illinois Gordon and Junebug Williams, who approached Scalise from behind with professional calm. What followed was systematic, surgical, designed to create lasting consequence without causing death. Scalise's hands were placed flat on the mahogany surface, the same hands that had signaled cheating, the same hands that had pointed in racial contempt. The enforcement was controlled, precise, each bone broken with deliberate force that ensured function would never fully return. Every future struggle with simple tasks would remind him of the cost of public disrespect. As Scalise collapsed to his knees, screaming through shattered dignity, Bumpy produced a handwritten note from his jacket pocket. The paper was expensive stationery, the penmanship careful and judicial. He approached the broken man and drove an ice pick through the message into the shoulder padding of his ruined suit, pinning consequence to flesh with surgical precision. The note read, "Animals don't leave witnesses, but men of respect leave lessons." Bumpy left him breathing, conscious, financially destroyed, physically broken, reputation incinerated in the same room where he had laughed at racial slurs 48 hours earlier. Death would have made Scalise a martyr. Survival made him a cautionary tale, a living monument to what happened when disrespect met systematic consequence. As dawn broke over Manhattan at 5:47 morning, Word traveled through social clubs and midnight telephone lines with the speed of financial markets responding to catastrophic news. The Meridian Club had changed hands. Lines crackled from Midtown to Brooklyn to the Bronx, carrying news that would reshape the geography of organized crime in New York. At 6:15 morning, Vincent Gigante's private line rang in his Upper West Side townhouse. The voice was calm, unhurried, carrying judicial finality. The invitation you sent was honored. The disrespect has been corrected. Harlem appreciates your courtesy. The line went dead before Gigante could respond. He sat in silence, staring at the receiver, understanding that Bumpy Johnson had just redefined the balance of power in New York through cards, mathematics, and the kind of systematic revenge that left lessons instead of corpses. The Meridian Club reopened 12 days later under management that valued mathematics over mythology. The crystal chandeliers still cast expensive light over green felt, but the games beneath operated with surgical honesty. Blackjack dealt from unmanipulated shoes, craps tables with square dice, roulette wheels spinning without magnetic interference. The house maintained its edge through probability rather than deception, and the clientele transformed accordingly. Black businessmen from Harlem sat beside Irish contractors from Hell's Kitchen. Policy runners shared tables with legitimate merchants. The color line that had defined the club's racial architecture dissolved through enforcement of a single principle. Money respected skill regardless of the hand holding it. The confiscated wealth never entered Bumpy's personal accounts. $150,000 in dirty money flowed back into Harlem's economic arteries like a transfusion. Marcus Garvey's widow received $18,000 for the community center facing foreclosure. Abyssinian Baptist Church got $23,000 for roof repairs the city had refused to fund. 12 small businesses denied legitimate bank loans received capital injections that transformed survival into expansion. Policy cash once destined for private school tuition in Westchester instead resurfaced as operating capital for barbershops denied by Chase Manhattan. Families facing eviction on 125th Street found anonymous envelopes containing 3 months' rent in advance. Each distribution carried no publicity, no gratitude required, just systematic correction of institutional theft disguised as policy enforcement. The corrupt officials disappeared through resignation rather than scandal. Judge Whitman announced early retirement citing health concerns, accepting a Connecticut judgeship far from federal scrutiny. Deputy Commissioner Fisk transferred to a desk position in Albany, where his proximity to organized crime investigations ended permanently. 3 federal agents requested reassignments to regional offices where their compromised status wouldn't threaten prosecutions. The system cleansed itself quietly, understanding that exposure served nobody's interests except prosecutors building careers on corruption cases. Anthony Scalise was discovered 72 hours later in a Brooklyn alley behind a closed butcher shop, alive but fundamentally destroyed. Both hands encased in medical casts, his face bearing the pallor of shock that hadn't subsided. Expensive suit stained with evidence of 3 days spent contemplating consequence. He wasn't killed because death is release. He was left alive to serve as a walking monument to miscalculation. His reputation, built over 3 generations, evaporated instantly. He became a ghost in his own city, a man who had bet his heritage against superior intellect and lost everything. The 5 families' response arrived through adaptation rather than retaliation. They recognized that Bumpy had honored diplomatic protocol while correcting disrespect that threatened inter-organizational agreements. Retaliation would acknowledge that Scalise's humiliation was unjust, and every boss understood his arrogance had violated established boundaries. Results commanded respect regardless of racial lines that civilians still observed. Throughout Harlem, the story circulated not as criminal mythology, but as economic correction. Barbershops discussed how systematic disrespect carried mathematical consequences. Church congregations understood that dignity possessed measurable price tags, and some men possessed organizational capacity to collect payment with interest. Wednesday afternoon, Bumpy occupied his customary booth at the Red Rooster, reading about management changes at a prominent Manhattan establishment. A young policy runner approached, asking directly about the Meridian situation. Bumpy folded the newspaper with precise movements and delivered his response in measured tones that carried judicial finality. A man's reputation is built on how he handles disrespect. Some people need expensive lessons to understand that. The simplicity concealed systematic complexity. Every participant had been selected and positioned years before Scalise's insult provided justification. The Meridian Club wasn't opportunistic revenge. It was demonstration of organizational superiority disguised as personal consequence. In Bumpy Johnson's world, respect wasn't requested through negotiation or granted through birthright. It was earned through precision, enforced through consequences, and maintained through understanding that some men didn't just play games defined by others. They rewrote rules entirely. When those rules were violated, the price was everything you thought made you untouchable.